Welcome to the Visually Hidden Selects podcast, where we discuss an independent approach to the art of cinema and explore the subtext of various featured films. My name is Peter O'Brien, and I am an independent filmmaker, author, and musician.
My name is Bendler. I'm a film and stage actor and a pop culture enthusiast.
I'm Anne Milleville, a French screenwriter and producer.
And Milleville is not going to be joining us today. However, we do have a special guest commentator for Dawn of the Dead, Miss Louise Lynch, who you may remember from such podcasts as Conan the Barbarian and The Abyss. She's here today to discuss this week's film.
Hey, everybody. Great to be here again.
This week's VHS selection is Dawn of the Dead from 1978, written and directed by George A. Romero and starring Gaylen Ross, David Emge, Scott H. Reiniger, and Ken Foree. If you have not seen Dawn of the Dead, and I'm talking about the original here, not the 2004 remake, then I strongly encourage you to head over to the Visually Hidden YouTube channel, subscribe so you don't miss any future recommendations, check out the video, check out the film, and come on back to the podcast because we will be discussing it openly with spoilers. Here we go. So Dawn of the Dead it's the sequel to Night of the Living Dead, and it was made about 10 years after that original film. And in between, George Romero had done quite a few films, but I feel like this one is really kind of where he made the transition from amateur, regional, independent filmmaker to professional, independent filmmaker. I feel like a lot of those other films, including Night of the Living Dead, were kind of just honing skills that he could then employ in this film and moving forward. Because of course, after this, he was, kind of a lot more recognized professionally, and he got a lot more opportunities professionally. So for me, I feel like this is that kind of actual breakthrough film. I didn't see this one for a long time. I was sort of aware of it, but I really didn't see it until junior high. And even then, it wasn't something that jumped right out at me. It was really in high school that I think I first sat down and watched it start to finish. But it's one that has really grown with me or grown on me over the years. Not that I didn't like it when I first saw it, but it's just something that I find myself going back to a lot.
This is one of those movies that when I was a kid walking around Blockbuster, the look of the box and the pictures on the back would freak me out. And I was like, I don't know if I want to watch that. Meanwhile, I'm watching like Elm Street and all these other crazy movies that are probably scarier and would more nightmare fuel than this movie was. But just the look of it and Day of the Dead next to each other, I'm like, I don't know about those two movies. Maybe they look severe, like for 10-year-old me. For me, the movie always had, I don't want to say hype because hype's not the right word, but it had a bit of a mystique and a bit of a pedigree. Like, this is the one. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought it had a lot of merit, and it was very much the blueprint for what we now know as the modern zombie film. Even though I take nothing away from Night of the Living Dead, I love that movie. And as of right now, it's still my favorite of the Romero zombie movies. But again, I've only seen this one once, so who knows, maybe it could change over time. But yeah.
As a scientist, I love going back to primary data sources. That's kind of a thing I do. So for this film, I was not that familiar with Dawn of the Dead. I don't have a long history with it, but I do like a lot of the more modern films, 28 Days Later, Shaun of the Dead, Zombieland, Train to Busan. I really enjoy those. So I got enjoyment out of going back to one of the films that started it and was one of the blueprints for the zombie films that we have these days. I think every time I watch the beginning, I'm really taken. But the last time I watched this would have been before COVID. So I find like the beginning, it's very fast paced. It's chaotic. Everybody's upset. It's crazy. There's unsettling stuff going on. That definitely pulls you right in. But now that I've watched it, it kind of reminds me of COVID. When you see everything kind of going crazy on the news and the TV station, it kind of reminded me of some of the madness that we've had more recently. You see ugly things coming out of people, ugly behaviors, and that confrontation when people aren't agreeing. It definitely pulls you right in, and then you get to meet your characters, and from there it's just smooth sailing as far as being invested in the story.
Yeah, one thing that it kind of makes me think about is like, all right, this movie came out in 1978 and it's very early in the zombie genre. I mean, there were films between Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. And there were films even before Night of the Living Dead that had to do with zombies, but this is really like the pop culture breakthrough for that subgenre of horror. And the thing that I think about when I watch it is like, yeah, the echo of the film into like The Walking Dead. And you see all these like despicable characters like treating each other like so poorly and selfishly. And that's present in this film. I wonder, like, are we imitating art? Or is this, like what was George Romero basing this on, this behavior of these characters? When you watch Night of the Living Dead, the characters are at odds with each other, locked up in the house. And here it's really the main characters, they're a little bit at odds, but for the most part, they're a united front, they're working together to accomplish their goal of survival. And it's not really until the third act when the conflict comes in with the biker gang that it really like the shit hits the fan, and those people are just like out for themselves. But at the same time, they're a part of their own little community, they're not like turning on each other like cannibals, So it's just an interesting, I guess, social commentary that this film presents in addition to the zombies as well.
I always feel it's science fiction because this is a bit science fiction too. It's not just a horror film. Science fiction writers, directors, storytellers, whatever the medium, they always seem to have the finger on the pulse of humanity and truly how people think and behave. You see it in the Twilight Zone. And there's so much of that in there of how people really, really, really behave.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I like about science fiction too, because I think science is a human pursuit, right? So like that part of it and looking to the future and what's in store for us, maybe if we were to sit down and imagine it, the fiction part, right? I think then there's always going to be like some type of human phenomenon at the center of it. And so we're just looking at things that don't change, like some of the stuff we're seeing in the beginning of this film, we still do that stuff today. We can't sit down and talk about two opposing thoughts and not get riled up. So that part, the human part, doesn't change, but the setting does. And so sometimes I feel like it's fun to explore like, oh, how will we respond in a zombie apocalypse?
The opening scene was one of my favorite parts of the movie. I love the chaos. And I was trying to rack my brain and think about another zombie film that starts like that. Yeah, there are zombie films that start with some kind of news broadcast or multiple news broadcasts. You see TVs flickering and okay, yeah, great. But being in the newsroom and feeling that chaos and just people running around and, a nice little cameo from the director in the chair, that pulled me in because night starts out, Johnny and Barbara in the cemetery, doing their visit and whatever, and him complaining about the driving and whatnot. And so it always starts usually like on a one-to-one basis, and then something strange happens, and then they realize, all of our surroundings are fucked. This was just like, boom, you're in the chaos. And it was like hit the ground running. And I really, really enjoyed that about this film. I thought it was really cool. And I don't think I've seen it before. And if I have seen it, it clearly wasn't memorable because I can't think of it. So I think this is a good way to jump in and a nice entry point for this specific style of story. Because I think that's the thing with this and Night. Yeah, there is a sequel and it's the same director and it's the same idea, but the styles are different, And when I was watching it, it kind of reminded me of like Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction. It's like, here's what I can do on a small scale, but if you like give me a little money and give me a little time, this is what I can do.
I also wanted to loop back to something you said, Peter, about Dawn of the Dead being George A. Romero's example of stepping into professional filmmaking. I think that's one thing that kind of hooks you in the beginning too, because they have this gigantic location. I mean, there's a huge mall that's not an abandoned mall, so obviously it's not going to be convenient to film there. I think you get a feel for the level of filmmaking here pretty quickly. There's a helicopter. They got a helicopter like all over the place, right? And then all of the zombies, like all of these extras that are also, they look unique. I don't think they just showed up in their clothes. Automatically, you get a feel that like this is a professional undertaking and a professional film.
A while back, we discussed a film called Escape from New York. And in that VHS, I remember saying that film is a perfect example of a masterclass in independent filmmaking. And I think Dawn of the Dead lives in that same breath, in that same category. This film really is a masterclass in independent filmmaking because, again, George Romero, he was a regional filmmaker. He primarily worked out of Pittsburgh for his entire career. Even when he was making studio films, a lot of times they were filmed in and around Pittsburgh. But this film had a budget of about $500,000. And when you think about it, like with everything that's involved and all of the extras and all of the makeup and effects and then the locations and everything that's involved, I mean, Halloween was filmed that same year for $320,000. So these are small scale films, but they're achieving incredible results utilizing what's available. And what was available to George Romero was a fucking mall. He knew the owners of the Monroeville Mall, and that was what inspired him to develop this story. And he just visited the mall, and then he just kind of developed the story, and he wrote to his assets and utilized them to perfection. And again, it's that 10-year journey between Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead that I think just enabled him to be able to see what was possible, what wasn't possible, what would be effective, and what would be the most engaging for an audience, you know, after doing so many other different kinds of films.
Like what you said about Halloween too. It's so weird that they both came out in the same year because there were zombie films before and there were slasher films before. But the key with these two specifically is they became the blueprint going forward. This is how this genre is going to work, and it hasn't stopped.
Yeah, and Dawn of the Dead definitely has a feel to it, like a unique characteristic. And I think there was maybe some contention about some of the things that I felt gave it that unique look. The blood was one thing. It was really bright red, but it had this artistic effect when you're watching the film. And I think George A. Romero was going for a comic book look.
Yeah.
And I think that was consistent. So it wasn't just red blood, but you also had the makeup on the zombies. It was like artistic.
Well, when you look at the film and then you think about like the old EC horror comics, Tales from the Crypt and the Vault of Horror, like even the shots in this film and the way the frame is set could very easily translate to a comic book. And so even the presentation of the zombies or the ghouls, whatever you want to call them, with just the pale blue greenish paint on them, that's like a comic book come to life but dead, like it's that funny kind of like gray area of artistic interpretation.
Even if you don't have that information that was the kind of look the director was going for, it's consistent throughout, so it just works. It never took me out of the story when you see that like bright red blood splatter wherever it does. The human core, those four characters, is such a strong focus. You just kind of accept the world and the colors and the look that are around you and the story that you're in.
Admittedly, this movie is not the most polished, right? It's a little rough around the edges. It's a little punk rock. It is what it is. And I think that's kind of what makes it cool. It makes it badass and a little bit of an outlaw. But with these old films, I find just because that they were filmed in the 70s and on a kind of a shoestring budget at times makes it inherently scary or creepy. Because I'm watching the remake, and even though they delve into character a little more, everything still felt a little bit safe in what you saw inside the frame. Yeah, when the zombies are running after them and they're biting people, obviously that's terrifying. But everything else seemed very, very of that era, the 2004 era, where it was just like, nothing's going to happen right now because the music's not telling me it's going to happen. And where I feel like in these older films, you didn't know it was going to happen. And it was the Wild West. And that makes it feel dangerous.
Yeah, I could see where you're going with that. With the newer films, they're cleaner, they're crisper, it feels more present. And with the older ones, yeah, it's almost like a dull-edged knife. Like it's still going to get you and it's going to hurt.
And even the cinematography, like it has almost like a documentary type feel, which gives it that like realistic edge.
Yeah, which was always one of the creepiest parts of Night, right? At the end, you're seeing that, they take Ben's body out, they throw it in the pile, they're taking photos.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons I appreciate a little bit of the humor throughout the film too, because it just takes the edge off. You get these little like respites, right, from all that like creepiness.
That's another thing that I think, a lot of people tend to forget. Like they take things too seriously sometimes. And like if they're watching a movie, it's like it has to be serious or it's garbage. And it's like there's humor in life, in serious situations. Like you could be at a funeral, but people will still be telling jokes because they want to deal with those other extremes, or they want to avoid those extremes. And so I think it's a more accurate representation of life and reality when there is conflicting themes present in a genre film. Like it's okay to have humor as long as it's not totally slapstick, like 100%, because then you're going into something different. Yeah. But even, we talked about Lord of the Rings the other week, and like there's humorous moments in that film as well. The exchange of a character or a look look from a character, or if you deprive the audience of humor, you kind of shooting yourself in the foot, I think, as a storyteller and as an entertainer.
Yeah, it'll be like emotional overload. If you just keep going up and up, you're gonna hit a ceiling. So I feel like the humor just kind of like breaks you back down, and then you can continue to have the horror experience.
Or if you're going down and you just keep getting fucking darker, it's like, shit, I feel fucking
Yeah,
horrible watching that. I'm never going to watch this again because I feel
again.
fucking just miserable.
Yeah.
It's a release valve, right? All that pressure builds up,
Mhm,
and then here's a laugh. And I can release the
mhm.
pressure, and then we can build up again. The other thing I was impressed with upon this first viewing is how ambitious this movie was. There's a lot of people in a giant space to try to navigate. So, kudos to him.
I think the peak of that wave is probably the pie fight with the
Yeah.
bikers, you know?
Yeah.
It's funny, but it's also ridiculous, but it somehow
Yeah.
works with that group of characters. You know, you would never
Mhm,
see Peter and Roger throwing pies
Mm-hmm.
at the
Mm-hmm.
zombies, but the bikers, they're like total disregard and disrespect for like all things not them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think even the lumbering around, it kind of balances the violence of the zombies too, except for the 2 kid zombies. They seemed to move pretty fast, and it
Yeah.
sucked that Peter had to put them down. And then like the lumbering airfield guy that kind of looks like Frankenstein, and you're watching him kind of lumber around and go over boxes, and then the top of his head gets removed. Like that stunt was
That was
insane.
badass.
Yeah, that was pretty wild.
Yeah, the effects in this film, like I said, like Tom Savini, he really is kind of the star. You know, like all the cast did a great job, and Romero did a great job writing, directing, and editing the film. But really, like if you gotta like pick out a star from this film, it is Tom Savini. What he was doing with the effects and everything in this film, you know, everything like it just looks so good for what it is. Like, let's be real. It's not today's standards, but you think of like, oh, well, how would they have done this 50 years ago without the benefit of CGI? Like, how could you realistically, or as realistically as possible, make it look like somebody is taking a bite out of somebody else's neck?
Mm-hmm.
And he does that in the first like 10 minutes of this movie during the tenement strike, you know? And it's like,
Hmm.
that was so savage.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Like that was like one of the most savage things I had ever seen. And then the shotgun blast to the head and the head just explodes. And then like if it cuts to a woman screaming, but you see the headless body fall down in the background. It's like, man, he's really covering all the bases here.
That helicopter spot was my favorite
Yeah.
effect because I didn't see it coming. I was just like,
Hmm.
oh, what the how the fuck? And, and then immediately it was like, how'd they do that? You go into that mode.
And now a word from our sponsor.
This podcast is brought to you by Visually Hidden Selects. If you're looking for a spoiler-free recommendation of a classic film with professional analysis and insight, check out Visually Hidden Selects, exclusively on the Visually Hidden YouTube channel. I love Peter's introduction. I love like, you ain't just in here by yourself, boy. And like he's got the mask on and everything. And yeah, you kind of think like cowboy, alpha male, who's going to be. And then he's so even keeled. He works really well under pressure and really unbiased. I love his interactions with Fran. Any scenes with him, it was just fun to see how he operated in this insane situation.
Yeah, he was an equal opportunity ass kicker.
Definitely. But I think that's part of the beauty because right before you meet Peter, you do have these racist comments or like
Yeah.
that's the context. And then when they're working together, that's one of the qualities of this group
Mhm.
is that they're not in that sphere and not in that mindset because they're kind of past that, I
Right.
think. And I think you do get a feel for Peter's character like pretty quickly. When he first meets Roger, he's a little funny, but then like he takes care of business. So he like takes control of a situation where others are kind of floundering a little bit. And then you see when he is taking out these zombies, it affects him emotionally. So you just get like these quick snapshots, boom, boom, boom. I feel like his character is established really strong, really fast. I think the only thing that when I see it in the end, when he kind of holds himself up, and he's giving up. It's kind of like, no,
Yeah.
like you
Mhm.
can't do this. Like this isn't your character. And then the music there is a little funny, like that very like patriotic music. So, but it also kind of like lets you like release the pressure of like, oh my God, he's gonna let himself get killed. He's gonna let himself get taken.
After all that,
After all of that, and after all you've seen him do and all he's capable of. So then it's such a relief when he changes his mind, he goes up, and then you just get more relief with the humorous music.
Originally, they did both commit suicide.
Oh, man.
At the end, Peter did kill himself, and Fran, actually, that's why they did the stunt with the zombie going up into the helicopter blades, because that's what Fran was originally scripted to have done. She was just going to kill herself with the helicopter blades, and that was going to be the end of the movie, and it was going to be a very, very, very bleak, downbeat ending like Night of the Living Dead.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's another reason why this film, I personally like it better. It is my favorite zombie film and one of my favorite horror films, but I think it's because of that, and like the characters, they do come close. Fran stands on the edge of the helicopter, like looking out, like what am I running from anymore? Like, where am I going to go? They're everywhere. And Peter's like staring them down, like, and you can see he's about to go, and then he has that like, no, fuck this. They can't win. I'm not a coward. You're right. That's not my character. I'm not doing that. And I love when he's on the roof and he encounters the zombie with the machine gun.
Yes.
And they like trade. It's like one last little smile before you go.
I also like the ending because you don't know where they're going. They're low on fuel. She's got a baby on the way. Peter's lost his friend. Fran's lost her guy, but there is still a little bit of hope because they still have fight in them. And they found a place and they established themselves once already. So I feel like because they didn't back down, they're not going to go down easy. So who knows where they go, but I am really glad that they went with a little bit more of a hopeful ending there.
Yeah. What I find hilarious in this film is how many times one of them just punches a zombie right in the face. Like I laughed out loud so many times. Like he just cracked that guy. So good. But I gotta admit though, I was a little mad with Fran for a few minutes there when my man Steven's on the floor fighting for his life and she's not helping him grab that weapon
at the airport.
I
think that's part of the character's growth and part of their arc. Like in the beginning, they're civilians. They work in an office. They work for the television station. That's it. Like Peter and Roger, they're on the street. And they're like tactical trained, soldiers to an extent, but they're part of the police force. Like in that same sequence when Steven is trying to shoot the zombies and he keeps like, hitting them in the torso or missing them all together. And then Roger comes along and just like knocks the barrel back and one shot in the head, boom, and like it says a lot about their characters. Steven really is a yutz.
Like, he is. That's the word.
He's just a yutz. Like he has like no business surviving this ordeal, but it's only through his relationship with Roger and subsequently Peter that he starts to kind of come around and find those skills. But the whole movie, Peter is basically coaching him. Right after that, he points the gun at him, says, don't ever point a gun at somebody.
Right.
Later on in the mall, he's like, come on, just run to me. Don't lead them back up there. Run to me. Let's go. Even when they're locking off the mall, he's still like saying like, we'll pick them off easy. It'll be okay. Like the whole movie, he's basically Steven's coach.
Yeah, that was good. That was my only angry moment with Fran. Come on, help the guy out. At least hand him the weapon.
And I think it's through situations like that where it's like this might be the first time she's seeing it face to face.
Right.
Who knows how long she was like hiding in the television studio.
Yeah, Steven, he's cool. He was also, I found him a little trying sometimes too, like his first introduction. When he first meet him, like, don't make me come and find you, like that whole thing. And like he could fly, but he was not a soldier. And thank goodness he happened to get connected to a couple because he wasn't a good shot. But they practiced, like they got there, like when they're practicing on the ice rink, they got there. When she learns to fly, like they definitely start to elevate themselves.
I will say this though. I think Steven or David Emge rather, he's one of the best fucking zombies in cinema history. When he turns at the end and he comes out of the elevator and he's got that like slack-jawed look on his face and like his eyes, like he's one of the best looking ghouls I think I've ever seen. And even the way he walks with like his foot turned in like Kaiser Soze.
I was just gonna say that he's like walking on his ankle.
Yeah
And then you really think he's gonna trip, right? And he doesn't.
Like,
he
then
steadies himself.
And the way he like comes through the wall, like he is like totally committed to like that transformation of his character. And it's fantastic. So like, I think after you first see the movie and you go back and you watch it, it's like it's a little bit easier to take Flyboy's faults because you know his fate. That's how it is for me anyways.
Yeah, and that was really tight how they set that up when he comes out of the elevator and he remembers where he has to go. I mean, there was nothing weak about that connection and him opening up that wall with his like last memory. That's what he hung on to.
I always liked Peter and Roger like as a team.
Yeah.
And it is a little heartbreaking when you start to see Roger going off the rails and Peter tries to correct him. He's like, listen, man, you know, you're not just playing with your life, you're playing with mine. And he comes back, but by that point it's too late.
Yeah.
You know, I love the line where he's like, we got this by the ass. And that like look in his eye, you know, and like you can just see like on the reverse, Peter is not having any of it.
Yeah.
One of the other interactions that I really liked is when Roger does get bit. Peter's expression is like disappointment, like because it shouldn't have fucking happened. But he was, I guess, riding on the adrenaline high of like, I could do this, I could hotwire these fucking trucks all day and nothing's gonna stop me. And it's just like, but that was a great the tension in that scene when he's between the cabs and between the trucks. It's like, it was really good.
Yeah.
And then you have Fran and Steven watching from above and both of their reactions. And it's like they're both in positions where they can't really help. And it's just like making like it more and more tense. It's like, oh shit, it's like just out of reach.
Yeah, they were both trying, right? Flyboy was like trying to get his attention, right? And then let Peter know what's going on. Fran was trying to pick some of them off, but it was just bad. It was a bad location. I also wanted to say, you mentioned that David Emge was a good zombie. I think Scott Reiniger was too. When he only gets like a short moment, but when he rises up and just the makeup on his face and everything, and then when he's scanning and he sees Peter.
And that's another, like, just again, one of those like beautiful moments of their relationship where Peter tells Steven, like, I'll stay with him. Like he knows none of them have lasted more than 3 days, you know? So like the clock is running and he knows like, okay, yeah, it's going down now. So he sits there across the room, just watching, and you can just, the look on Peter's face, you know, the acting that Ken Foree is doing in that close up. It's like, you really kind of feel like, yeah, like this is his last friend, you know, like Steven and Fran, they're cool and everything, but like Roger was his buddy, like instantly, you know, like you don't get a lot of those relationships in life, period. And now like in his situation, it's like he doesn't know that he's ever getting that again. So it's like, yeah, it's a little heartbreaking as Roger comes back. It's such an awesome makeup job again. Like he looks really good, and the way he plays it for his 10 seconds on film, I think he does a great job. So much so that he's on the fucking cover of the box or one of the boxes, you know, it's Roger, and it's like, that's like putting the Statue of Liberty on the box for this Planet of the Apes, man. You're fucking giving that shit away.
I know. Yeah.
You're just waiting for it now. What the fuck?
Yeah. I don't think enough could be said about Tom Savini's running high knee that he gives that zombie and knocks him to the fucking ground. He was like a gazelle.
He was such a badass. Like he was a great character. I feel like a zombie apocalypse safety plan is probably one of the legacies of a film like this, because it takes place in like some type of familiar setting, right? So I think you have like we'll go here, you know, like this is the plan.
With these types of films, that's what becomes so engaging about them, is you start to see yourself in some of these characters in certain senses. And sometimes you're like, I wouldn't ever do anything like that. But then you start playing that game, and then that immediately gets you, gets you invested and interested.
Yeah, it definitely does a great job of like bringing the audience into the situation, because again, it is very relatable. It is very accessible. I think that's part of the staying power of this particular film is it's a very fun adventure, you know, like, and at the end of it, you're okay.
Yeah.
At no point during the course of watching this movie do you ever feel teeth on your flesh. You know, so at the end you could take the ride, and you know, just like a roller coaster, sometimes some turns are a little bit scarier than others, but sometimes it's just a little bit enjoyable, and it's part of like building the tension or suspense, and then there's the release, and then you get off and you move on. And so I feel like this film really delivers in that regard.
Yeah, having seen it finally, and then I watched the remake yesterday. The original is far superior. And the funny thing was, I'm sitting there and I'm watching it. And I'm saying to myself, well, there were cool things about the remake. Don't get me wrong, but in a weird way, the remake was soulless.
Yeah, I saw the remake in the theater, and I never walk out of a movie, but I came pretty close. Pretty close.
When you have situations like this in films, and you have characters that are like Roger and Peter. When I see real life tactical things being implemented, or just smart decisions, and right, Roger goes off the rails, right? Because he gets a little too cocky and a little too, we got this under control. But to see it from the outset, like, oh, they're gonna make this shit happen. They're gonna do this. And then it's like, oh no, he's getting way too comfortable taking these crazy chances. I feel like that heightens the audience's sense of like, oh fuck, something's going to go wrong here. And I think that's what pulls you in, instead of just a bunch of people that we don't care about making reckless choices from the outset. You can't get invested in that at all. It's just like, oh, I hope you die now. You know, you're an annoying character and I hope you go away. But you don't feel like that with them, because I think all these great decisions were made along the way. And you see how this thing is like a well-oiled machine. And then all of a sudden he gets too comfortable.
And I think most people watching this, we probably aspire to be like Peter and Roger, but I think most of us are probably Fran or Steven. And so I think one of the takeaways is, if there is a zombie apocalypse, you have your location, right? But it's also to find a Peter and a Roger who can train you and mentor you. And sure, you might have some things you can share with them, but that scene where they're going through with Steven how to like bait the zombies and get them back and everything, and then they all start laughing and he starts laughing, like I would totally be that dork. Like he's just kind of dorky right there, and that would be me.
It was a nice bonding moment.
It was.
You know, it's kind of interesting. You guys brought up about how Fran just kind of watched Steven get attacked by the zombie and didn't help out. But the same thing happens to Roger in the department store. He gets tackled by that one zombie. And Peter and Steven just kind of watch, like they don't step in or pull him off or anything. And so now the only two characters who wrestled with the zombies are the ones who became zombies. That's kind of crazy too.
Oh, I didn't even think about that.
Good point.
Yeah, that was. I at first I thought like Peter was just thinking like, oh, he's got it, but then like they were rolling around for a little while there. Like, that zombie's mouth was getting uncomfortably close.
Like he could have easily cracked him with the butt of his rifle and,
Yeah.
and put him down. You know, you didn't have to watch Roger like struggle for the fucking screwdriver in his tool belt.
Yeah.
Right. And they were punching them in the head before, right? What's one more punch?
I felt the same way. I was like, help this guy out. You need him.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly.
But if nothing else but self-preservation, you need him. Maybe that was the foreshadowing, the macho bravado, you know, that Roger will do it all. You know, I got it. I got it by the ass. No problem. The other thing I thought was really cool was just them driving the car in the mall.
Oh, yeah.
So cool looking.
Yeah, that was a good idea.
Yeah. Just picking them off, driving around. This movie would make an excellent video game. And I think that's part of the legacy as well, is that it inspired things like Resident Evil and House of the Dead and all that stuff. You know, this really is like such a springboard for the zombie subgenre.
Well, they sued somebody. Dead Rising maybe was the game, I think it was. They got sued because it was in a mall. It was too close to Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah, well, I mean, you got to do it right, but yeah, like the idea clearly is excellent and just a lot of fun.
What makes it great is that you could put any store you want in the mall, and who's to say that it's not there? So it's a great writing tool of like, oh, well, we need this, this, and this. Oh, we'll just put those stores. The possibilities are endless.
Yeah, it really is a very cool mall. I'm still like happy that I actually got to go there. It wasn't that far off, but I remember when I first went in, I saw the bricks and I was like, oh, those are the car drove by here. Yeah. And like, of course, a lot of the stores have changed, and, you know, like the ice skating rink was replaced with the food court, you know, things like that. But JCPenney still had the escalator.
Did you slide down the middle?
I did not, but I think they may have installed those little bumps along there. And I think it's because of this movie that kind of became a common thing.
I was just thinking, like, if he doesn't stick that landing, then Ken Foree's got to run back up those stairs.
And doesn't Ken Foree have to like grab a rifle at the end too? Like right before he gets down?
Yeah, so it's like, he has to take it off so he doesn't hit into. Yeah, so
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
nicely timed shot.
A few years ago, I got to see this film in the theater at the Alamo Drafthouse. They played the 3D version of this, which the producer spent like $6 million
Jesus.
converting this film to 3D. And I am not a fan of 3D, but this was the best 3D film I have ever seen in my entire life. It looked so good. And a lot of the gags just loaned themselves to that format and that presentation so well. Heads exploding, and even Rogers sliding down the escalator, like coming right at you. Like, it just looked so freaking good. I wish it had a wide re-release because it would very easily make back that $6 million plus.
I'd go see it.
But I think it's because of that investment that now the film is tied up, and that's why it's not really available anywhere. There's some type of like financial voodoo going on with it where it's not accessible readily at the moment outside of physical media, and it's a bit of a shame. But yeah, I don't know how the Alamo got that, but I'm so thankful that they did, because I was like, oh cool, well, I'll get to see it on the big screen, like 3D and whatever. But like, it was probably before that opening sequence was over, I was like, this is fucking amazing. This is what I've always wanted from 3D movies.
Yeah.
If anybody who's hearing this has the chance to, please break your leg running to the theater to see Dawn of the Dead 1978 in 3D. It is amazing. But yeah, the fact that like the zombies have to go to the mall, and what does that say about like us as a race of consumers? Like there's some backhandedness in the messages in this movie. There's definitely a social commentary going on, and I do appreciate that it does come from George Romero, who is the writer and the director, and like you guys said about good science fiction, and we talked about this months ago when we touched on some science fiction films like Planet of the Apes and Escape from New York. There's always like this theme of allegory tied into these stories, and even though this one is a horror film, it plays with that as well, where it's kind of holding a mirror up to the audience, and like, it's in the eye of the beholder. Like, what are you seeing in this story, or what are you seeing from these characters? And everybody's takeaway is different. It could just be a simple adventure, horror, survival film, or it could be a criticism on culture and consumerism.
Yeah, and the one guy that takes the TV,
Yeah.
like somebody points out, like, how are you going to watch
Yeah,
that?
what are you going to watch on that?
But isn't that funny? Even in those moments, that's still in our nature to take the things.
Yeah, not the
Right,
food.
to take the things that we would
TV.
covet normally. And it's kind of like the
Right.
zombies. Like, we're not any different. The zombies will go to the mall, and these people are still going to the mall to rob the bank, take the jewels, and grab a television. Then they touched on, the abortion thing. What should she do? And say, well, don't I have a say in this decision about me? That was kind of a risky thing, I think, and a ballsy statement that Romero put that in there. And it's brief, but it's in there, and it's just another thing on top.
But it's risky and ballsy to you today, but at that time, which I was not present for personally, it's Peter thinking logistically.
Right.
Like, okay, we're in this horrible situation. Resources are limited. It's a danger to her possibly, and the infant almost definitely. Where are you going to get the things that you need? How do you know you're going to have the things you need to care for that baby? So it's not even so much a like being a black or white dick about it.
Right.
He's just being practical and logical about their situation.
Yeah, totally.
I think that's kind of like when people watch it today, they hone in on that, and they hone in on like the ramifications of it. But, if you watch it thinking about it a different way than your own beliefs or your own agenda or your own alignment, I think it's interesting that it's in there.
Yeah.
But for me, it's never been like a kind of moment. Whereas a few people I have shared this film with have mentioned that scene specifically. I'm always like, that's the one you want to talk about?
Yeah, it's just one of the many things you'd have to contend with.
Yeah.
In addition to food, it's like life kept going on. It wasn't like they all started like with a clean slate. Like they already had their life in the works. She had wanted to start a family. That's what Stephen made that comment. And so now you have like drop in this catastrophic occurrence. So like what do you do?
And it also raises the
Um,
stakes for her as a character, limits her
mhm.
to what she can and
Yes.
cannot do. And it's a
Mhm.
funny thing because, talking about the social commentary of it, how some things have not changed at all. And then
They really
and some
haven't.
things changed in a way of how we perceive it. What's taboo, what's not taboo, what's risky, what's ballsy. So there's so many, it's a multifaceted thing, and it wasn't intended to be. It was just, this is what George wrote, this is what we're shooting, this is what it is. But it's funny to see people's responses to it over the decades, how it's changed.
Or even how to handle the dead. I'm trying to remember the conversation with that one-legged priest, right? I think he says he gave them last rites. And then he says something to the effect of, I think in a moment they're going to be stronger than you are, right? But I think like the whole handling of the dead, and that's one of the conflicts you see in the beginning that people can't agree on, and they're getting really heated, that they have to be destroyed. They have to be put down. They're not people anymore. And that's another thing that like that hasn't changed. It doesn't matter if you're in space or if you're in a zombie apocalypse. When people disagree, they go back to like the id just starts to overrun, and it's difficult for them to have a logical discussion, which I think helps Peter, his character, stand out because he does seem pretty even keeled. He's what we aspire to be in this kind of a setting.
You had just mentioned about how people couldn't agree on how to handle the dead, and I'm just always like sucked right back to that opening scene in the apartment building, and the one police officer said, "Shoot him, man! Shoot him in the head!" And the one cop, like, he can't bring himself to do it, and he winds up shooting himself in the head because he gets bit, because he hesitates, because he doesn't want to be a killer.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it really is just that simple. That was probably my introduction to this film, was that scene and that line. Shoot him, man. Shoot him in the head.
Yeah, and even you have the couple too. So you have the one man that's a zombie, and like the woman like runs into his arms, right? And so she just sees her beloved, I suppose, and and gets destroyed.
Yeah. The other way to look at that whole opening tenement scene, when people are just shooting and yelling and all the craziness, and even in the opening scene in the newsroom, when times get tense and tough and crazy, people can't seem to agree or can't even allow themselves to hear the other person just on a human level. You lose your humanity as you go along, But then there's Roger, who he takes the time out inside the tenement, and then when he gets bit, he still hangs on as long as he possibly can and tries to be of some use and some service to people. That's a fascinating way to look at that guy, try to hold his humanity in two different types of situations.
Yeah, there's just so much good stuff in this film. So I'm glad that you finally got to see it, Steve, and
Yeah,
we
man,
got
me
to talk
too.
about it. I'm glad that you enjoyed it. I'm glad that you like it better than the remake.
Yeah, I do.
That really made me happy. Out of everything that was said, that's really my takeaway. Is that, coming into this one late, it still stands taller.
Well, I'm glad I made you happy about that.
That will about do it for us here today at the Visually Hidden Selects podcast. We will be discussing a completely different film next time, so be sure to head over to our YouTube channel and subscribe so you don't miss any future recommendations. You can catch Steve and Bendler on Instagram over at Steve's Pop Culture Corner. Louise Lynch's musical work can be heard on Spotify. Just do a quick name search and you'll find her toot sweet. If not, you can check her out through the Visually Hidden projects. And of course, you can catch me over on Instagram as well as Letterboxd and find out what I've been watching and see what I think. And until next time, get it by the ass.
There you go.
Stay out of the mall.